Hello. We are going to be building the rock, paper, scissors solution today. The way that the game is going to be working is we're going to first ask the user to enter a choice. And then once the user enters their choice, we're going to ask the computer to do a choice. And then we're just going to print the results and then print some stats if the user won, lost, and tied. And then we're going to ask if the user wants to play again. So that's the way the app is going to look like. Um, so I'm going to create this. I'm going to do it with best practices in mind. I'm also going to follow an object-oriented approach. So first things first, I'm going to create my index.html. Going to create a script.js. Okay. So I'm going to generate a boilerplate HTML, so I don't have to type everything out. So the way that I do that is I just type HTML and then select the option with 5, and I get this nice boilerplate. And then I now need to link my script file. So I'm going to do script and then link it. So now these are linked. I can verify that by just putting a console log. And then I can open this in the default browser. And here we go. So we verified that our JavaScript is linked to our HTML. And now we can start building. So the way that I want to start building this is I want to start with an object. I just want to call this object game. So inside of this object, I'm going to put a whole bunch of properties and methods in order to make this game work. And again, I'm doing it in an object-oriented manner. You don't have to do this in an object-oriented manner. You can do it all functional. But I think when it comes to this game, object-oriented makes the most sense. It's just kind of like a cleaner solution. So I'm going to start with a method. I'm going to call it play. And then I'm just going to put a console log here, playing. So when this function is called, we should see console log playing. So if I refresh right now, I'm going to see nothing. And that's because this function hasn't been called. So the way I do that is I just do game.play. And this will start our game. And now we can see playing shows up. Okay. So I think the first thing we want to do is get the user choice. And the way that I want to do that is I want to create a function that's called getUserChoice. And in there, I will return a prompt saying enter R, P, or S. So the reason I separated this out into a function instead of putting it in here, because I could have just done const user choice equals window.prompt. I could have done this, right? But I'm kind of trying to do separation of concerns here. I'm trying to make this code as clean and readable as possible and split everything up into where it should be. So what this would look like instead is this dot get user choice, which I think is just easier to read, easier to maintain. If you need to change the code, you change this, and that's it. So I am using const here, and I'm only using const because I know this variable is never going to change. And I'm going to just console log the user choice. So let's just try and see if we can get that working. I'm going to enter R, and R shows up. So we know that this is this function or this method is working. So now we can try to get the computer choice. So I'm also going to separate that out into its own function. And the way that we're going to do this is we're actually going to use an array. And this array will contain the choices available that the computer can select from. And I'm first going to declare that array up here. And I'm declaring it within the game object. I could declare it in the global scope up here. But the point of an object is to like make sure all the properties like to make that work are related to it. So choices are kind of um, they're like bound to the game. So I want to keep the property in there. So I'm going to put R, P, S. These are our choices. And essentially, I'm going to select a random index and make that the computer choice. So I'm going to say random index. And then the way that we do this is math.random. And then we multiply that by the length of the array. So this is how you would do that. However, there's one tiny thing that you need to do and wrap it with a floor. And that's because math.random produces a decimal value. So you'll end up with something like 1.2, blah, 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 blah. And we just wrap that with a floor. So whatever this value is, if it's less than 5, or since we're using flooring, it will just take whatever value here and just make it 1. So if I get 2.86, like no matter what, it's just going to be 2. That's what the math floor does. We're just flooring the value and making it an integer. And since this can now just be 0, 1, or 2, that's the perfect candidate to use to get the index of our choices. Okay, so I'm now going to return our random, or the computer choice. I'm going to do that by using the random index. Okay. So I'm going to say computer choice equals this dot get computer choice. Okay, and then let's just console log that to make sure that's working. I'm also going to comment this out for just a second. We already verified this worked, so I just want to verify if this works without having to like input data all the time. Really annoying to do that. So I'm going to refresh R, S, R, P. So we can see that it's working. It's going through all the combinations. We're not getting undefined or any weird errors. So we know that our logic is correct. Okay. We can put that back. We verified that works. Okay. So the next part, now that we have the user choice and the computer choice, we need to calculate the result of that. Like who wins, who loses, who ties. So I create another function for that. So keep in mind, like I'm making all of these functions. Like I'm trying to make the play function as clean as possible. So yeah, let's work on for calculating a result. This is going to take a user choice and the computer choice. Okay. So that means that these values here, I need to pass them to this function when I call it. And that's how we can like calculate the result. So let's work on tying the user. So if the user choice is equal to the computer choice, we know that that is a tie. So I'm actually going to return tied here. Okay. You might be wondering why I'm not like console logging or alerting anything in here or even like keeping track of stats in here. The reason is I'm trying to do separation of concerns. I'm trying to follow best practices here. I don't want this function to do multiple things. I want it to just calculate the result. Did we win? Did we lose? Did we tie? I don't want it to do any stats modifications or alerting, because now that function would be doing multiple things other than calculating the result. So if the user choice is equal to the computer choice, we tie. And now I think let's work on the win condition. So if the user choice is equal to R and the computer choice is equal to S, that is a win condition. Win. Okay. And now instead of doing a whole bunch of other if statements, I am going to copy this. I'm actually going to wrap parentheses around this and then copy it again. And I'm going to put an or here. So we can use one if statement. Let me just put another one. So if the user chooses R and the computer chooses S, we win. If the user chooses P and the computer chooses R, we also win. and then S for user choice, P for computer choice, we also win. So these are all of the win conditions of the user. So now that we calculated tied and win, the only thing left is to just say return that we lost. We don't need to add if statements to check for losing because we already checked for tying, we already checked for winning. The last result is lost. So we want to write as dry code as possible. This is super easy to maintain. Don't have to worry about lost. Less work for me. So now that we calculated the result, let's actually call this function. I'm going to say const result equals this dot calculate result. And I'm going to pass it the user choice. And I'm going to pass it the computer choice. Then I'm just going to console.log result. Just to see. So I'm going to input R. And we won. P tied. So right now we're actually missing the printing of the computer choice. So let's actually add that really quick. So we did verify that this is working properly. So let's add another function. Let's call this print computer choice. And I'm going to say that this function takes computer choice as a parameter. And then I'm going to do console.log. I'm using backticks here. The reason I'm using backticks here, you may not have learned this yet, but this allows me to inject this variable into the string without having to use pluses. So let's take a look at that really quick. I'm going to say computer chose, and then I'm going to inject the variable by doing $, open close curly braces, and then just put computer choice in here. So now we want to call the function right here, print computer choice, and we're going to pass computer choice to it. And then here, let's also console.log the result just to verify one more time. So I'm going to enter R. Computer chose R. We tied. Nice. Computer chose P. We lost. So I did put a console log here. Let's do an alert because I believe that's how the solution wants it. I'm using alert here because this has no user interaction. This is just like displaying like details. So if I put R, computer chose R, so we should tie. Nice. Okay. So now we need to print the results, right? Like the win, loss, tied, because right now we're just console logging it. So now I would create another function, print results. Okay. So here's a function. This is going to take result. Here we go. And this function is also like really simple. It's just an alert. And we're going to say you, and then inject the variable again, result, with an exclamation mark. So now up here, I would say this dot print result, and then pass in the result that we got here. So I'm just passing it in here, so it's displayed. So let's see how that worked. R, computer chose P, so we should lose. Okay. So far so good. The next thing we want to do is to print the stats. So that's like wins, losses, and ties, like how many times, because we're going to offer the user to play this game again. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to create a stats object here, which is a child object of the game. And inside of here, I'm going to have wins. I'm going to set their initial value to 0, losses, 0, ties, 0. So we have our stats in an object. Again, I could have put them like right here. But I kind of want to like scope things a little better, make things a little cleaner if I ever needed to add more to this object. So all my stats, I want to put them in a stats object, just for like organization. So now we need a function to calculate the result, or calculate the stats. I'll write a function to calculate the stats. Okay, so we have our result. This function is going to take a parameter of result. And then now we are going to increment these values based on if we win, if we lost, if we tied. So I'm going to do that with a switch statement. I could use if statements here, but I think switch is cleaner for this. So result. So case, let's just check for time. So if we tied, we want to increment the stats of ties. And then we also want to break, so we don't go down to the next case. Okay, now let's just check for win. Notice how these actually match up with the results that came back from this function. Very important, otherwise it won't work. Okay, and then we'll increment wins. Now switches take a default, kind of like an else from an if statement. And then here we can just say losses. That way it's kind of similar to our if statement structure up here. We only checked for ties and wins and then return loss. So we can do the same thing here. Notice how we didn't have a break down here. You don't need one because the case statements, like this is, we only put it here so we don't fall through and run both of these together. So you don't need a break here. There's nothing below this. So you're good. So now that this function is written, we can call it this dot calculate stats and then pass in our result. Okay. And then I guess we can console log this dot stats to just make sure that this function is working properly. So we'll do an R. Computer chose P. We should lose. Losses got incremented. Nice. So far it's working. So I think we can now write a function to print the stats. So I'll write another function here, print stats. Okay, and then this function doesn't take any parameters because we're just using the stats object that's already in here. So we can use the this keyword for that. So the way that I'm going to do this is probably not a way that you've seen before, but I think it is like the most robust solution, and I'll go over how it works. I'm going to create stats and set it equal to an array. And then I'm going to do stats.push, and I'm going to push status. Okay. And then now I need to do the wins, losses, and ties. Wins. Actually, let me do this really quick. I'm going to use backticks for these because I need to inject the wins, losses, and ties. So wins, this dot stats dot wins, and then I'll change that to losses. Last one to ties. Okay. So the reason I'm doing this is I want these to be on separate lines. And instead of me having to put like \n after every single one of these, I kind of want to do that one time. So arrays actually offer me a way to do this. I can now just do window.alert and do stats.join and then put a \n. So the way that \n works, or join, is it takes all the elements one by one and makes a singular string, and then puts a \n between each element. So if we were to visualize that really quick, we have this element here, So when join is called, we make a new string and we put hello. And now that this element is done, before we move on to the next one, we're going to put whatever we put here, here. So this will look like \n. And now that we did this, we move on to the next element. Okay. And notice how we didn't put a \n here or a \n in the front. So the way join works is it only puts this \n in between elements. So this is exactly what we want. So when we call this .print stats, I think I named the function wrong. Print stats, yeah, there we go. Okay, let's take a look. R, computer chose P. I lost, loss is incremented by 1. Okay, and notice how they're all on separate lines. So it's because of that \n. Okay, so the last part is just needing to say play again. Okay, so let's write that function. The way that I'm going to do this, I'm going to say get is play again. The naming for this is kind of weird. Essentially, I want the developer to know that this function is returning a Boolean, so that's why I use the is keyword. So get is play again. You could say should. Get should play again. It's probably a better word. Get should play again. So I'm going to return window.confirm. So confirm returns a Boolean, true or false. And that's how we're going to do this. So we're going to ask the user to play again. So really quick, let's just double check that that works. Is playing again. This dot get should play again. And console log is playing again really quick just to verify. R. We won. Okay. Nice. So now if I hit OK, I should get true. Nice. And really quick, I should get false if I choose cancel. Okay. So if true, I want to run this play function again. And it's going to keep track of our stats because the stats are in a higher scope and they don't get reset every time this function is called. So you might be asking why I didn't put user choice and computer choice up here as well. And that's because I don't want the state of these variables to persist when we call play. When the function completes, all this memory gets cleaned up. So when you call it again, it's like fresh. These are like undefined initially. So that's why I didn't put them up there. So last function, or last thing that we're going to do is if is playing again. So if true, we're just going to say this dot play and play again. And that should complete rock, paper, scissors. Let's just take a look. You lost. Okay. Play again. We won. Look at that. See if we can get a tie here. Choose P. Oh, let's go. Okay. Yeah. So thanks for watching. I hope this was really helpful and you guys learned something. Thanks again.